What is up, guys? All good things must come to an end. So welcome to my review of the final stretch of episodes of Cobra Kai, Season 6, Part 3. This will be a spoiler-free review. I'll eventually get more into spoiler detail when I do my final ranking of all of the seasons as a whole. This review should be going up fairly close to when these 5 episodes drop on Netflix. So not going to get any specificity here. Just going to give you my overall impression of these final stretch of episodes, as well as a little bit of just my impression of the final season as a whole now that we have all 3 parts. And just for a little bit of context, in case this is your first time watching any of my Cobra Kai coverage, I have reviewed every single season of this show, so I'll put a playlist up here if you want to play catch-up before you watch this. But I've always been a really big fan of the Karate Kid franchise, grew up with the movies, and I was as skeptical as anybody whenever they decided to make this TV show, and it was going to be going on YouTube Red. All the stars were aligning for this to be an absolute dumpster fire. And I, much like everybody, was extremely shocked at how awesome this show ended up being. And while it definitely has its low points, it definitely has its misses here and there, throughout the entire run of the show, I have always enjoyed it. I would give an overall positive review to every single season of this show. But with that said, I think that the final season, more so than the others, has had more low points than high points. I enjoyed the second stretch of episodes more than the first one, and I will tell you I enjoyed this third stretch of episodes more than the other 2 stretches combined. So overall, I think it mostly worked out by the end of it, but I was walking into this final stretch of episodes definitely with modest expectations, but hoping that they were able to land the ship to close out this series in a satisfying way. And starting off with the positives, I will tell you that the last 3 episodes primarily are some of the most satisfying, some of the greatest fan service, some of the most emotionally gratifying stuff that we have seen in the show since maybe the first season. Like, there are moments, character interactions, payoffs that we get in the final 3 episodes of this season that to me is some of the most satisfying things as a fan that I have seen in this entire run of this show. And I'm glad to be able to say that, because I think while we had a very bumpy road on this final season, getting to the very end, overall, where they decide to end things, every single character, every character arc, I was very satisfied with, very happy with. And the last couple of episodes especially, I was really in my seat like, yeah, that's awesome. Oh yeah, we're doing this. Oh, this is cool. And it's a shame that it's a rarity that you get that type of emotional satisfaction by the finale of a show, because more shows than not, I believe, tend to fumble things at the end, or they end off in a somewhat unsatisfying way, or they completely just fumble everything, like Dexter twice. But this is one of those shows now that I've seen the end of it, I'm actually very happy and relieved that I can say, hey, it's worth watching all the way through. By the end of it, you will be very happy, rather than Cobra Kai's legacy being something like Game of Thrones or Dexter, where all of us have to say, oh, it's awesome, for a while. Everything that goes down with the final bit of the Sekai Takai tournament, I think that the choreography and the fights themselves are very exciting, very satisfying, and I also think that the way that they match up certain characters and the way that things play out with certain characters are also very natural. They're very organic. They make sense for the characters. They're something that closes out their character arcs. It makes sense for where they have been as a character. So overall, I mean, this is going to be 25 different ways of saying it. The final stretch of episodes where everything is at its finality, everything is at its closing point, I was very, very happy with what they decided to do narratively. As far as acting, I think you get some of the better performances that we have seen out of some of these actors, like William Zabka especially, really has some emotional stuff by the end of this show. Even Tanner Buchanan, who I've always liked, but have always been a little more critical of his emotional range as a character, he gets some really emotional moments here. So I think that everybody pretty much went for broke here. They wanted to leave it all out on the table. They knew they were closing things out, and they wanted to go out giving their all, physically and emotionally. And you get some really, really heartbreaking, touching moments between characters that are just really impressive for being these actors, these characters that we've spent now 6 seasons with, and they're still able to bring this new emotional depth to their characters. There's been this running gag of Rocky references in this final season. Like, we got a very direct Rocky 2 reference in the second stretch of episodes, and the way that they have that pay off in this final stretch of episodes referencing Rocky 3, I thought was just awesome. And there's even a dialogue exchange between Daniel and Johnny where Daniel's using the difference between the original Rocky and the 80s Rocky movies to make a point that I thought was brilliant. So if you're a Rocky fan, there's some very funny, very entertaining moments here. I was also surprised with how mature and how dark this last stretch was. I mean, now we've had some dark elements before, and the episode that closed off the second chunk of episodes actually involved a death of a student. So they've certainly been knocking on that door for a little bit, but for a show that's always had violence that's been reined in, or at least had a bit of a cap on it, that cap is gone at the end here. But by the end here, I mean, there's a number of things that happen here that is the most mature, the most adult stuff that we have seen out of the show yet, which brings a really nice counterbalance to how campy and silly the show tends to be at times. So be prepared. It goes for broke. Something that I'll mention too that I know a number of us were worried or at least hesitant about, given that this show is supposed to end just a few months before this Karate Kid Legends movie happens. Certainly a fear that I had was that this show was going to compromise being a satisfying Cobra Kai ending in order to be more of an on-ramp to whatever events or characters are going to happen in this movie. And I will say that did not happen. This was very much focused on being a Cobra Kai finale and not worrying at all about setting up anything for the future, even though we know that is in the very near future. And the final thing that I'll say is that I appreciated how much this final 5 episodes, primarily the final 3, really feels like things coming full circle from the first season in a number of ways that I can't get specific about, whether it's character arcs, whether it's music cues, whether it's the events of the actual fights. There's just so many things that feel like they're looping back around to where the show started, that it's a really fun thing for some of us that have been there from the beginning to almost like feel nostalgic as things are wrapping up. Moving on to the mixed, there are a few directions that they decide to take a couple of characters where I like where they were pushing them. I like where they eventually ended, but I felt like the journey to get there was extremely convoluted and messy. And, you know, that's kind of an overall theme for my thoughts on the final season that I'll get more into, but more specifically with this final stretch, I think where they took things with Kreese and with Terry Silver, I like what they did, but it felt like there was a much easier, much more organic and natural way to get there. And so it kind of ends up in this mix of emotions where things feel like they were convoluted and drawn out and spaced out unnecessarily, while also feeling very sudden and rushed. And I wish I could get a little bit more into specificity with that. But once you see the end of the show, you'll understand what I'm talking about. On paper, the bullet point idea of I want Kreese and Terry Silver to end here, thumbs up. I like what you did there. But all the ways that we had to get them there, it just didn't completely add up for me. It didn't feel like it flowed naturally. It felt like we just kind of had to stick a square peg in a round hole to get these characters where we wanted them by the end. And on that same note, I do think that some of the characters get a little bit shortchanged here. Now, I think that the characters that they decided to focus primarily on were the right choices. They're the characters that we want to have the most time with by the end of it. They're the ones that we want to see the most payoff with. They're the ones that we want to see have all these things add up by the end and have their character arcs come full circle. But there are a number of characters, a number of fan favorites that feel like they're just background characters and they're just kind of there along with everybody else. They don't really have much of a narrative focus by the end of it. So depending on who your favorite character in the show is, you might be a little bit disappointed on how much screen time, how much narrative focus they get in the finale. And now moving on to the negatives. While I did not hate the first 2 episodes of this 5-episode stretch, I feel like they were like this weird commercial break in the overall scheme of these 15 episodes. So where we left off in the last episode with the student being killed and them stopping the fight in the Sekai Taikai tournament, the next 2 episodes after that are this weird little meandering section where everybody's kind of in this odd place, and then eventually we get back to the Sekai Taikai tournament for the final 3. And it just kind of felt like we were dancing around. It felt like we were stretching things out. We were filling things out to get to a 15-episode season, when very obviously there was a way to do a very standard Cobra Kai length season and get all these story beats out in a much more efficient manner. So there are good things in those episodes. I understand they wanted to pause things a little bit for events like the baby being born and stuff, so I get it. But when you see the 5, and for how like firing on all cylinders the last 3 are, just back to back to back, those first 2 really feel like this calm before the storm that didn't need to be there. Added in with the fact that a number of the things that happen in those first 2 episodes is just yet again retreading things that we have already done multiple times in this show, which is again an issue that I've had with this entire final season, and even to a degree the previous season, where we have ran through all of our best storylines, all of our best character arcs, and so to keep the show going longer, we have had to dip back into the well and go back to things that we have already done, retread some character rivalries, retread certain betrayals and switching of sides. And so the first 2 episodes of this final stretch is like them training again for this tournament and getting in the right mindset and having certain conversations to get them to have balance and focus. And you have this weird VR game thing that Dimitri and Eli make that to me was like one of the dumbest things I've ever done in the show as far as silliness. So those first 2 episodes really held pretty much all of my issues for this final stretch, with the exception of one thing, one pretty significant thing. And normally I would not mention this out of fear of it being spoilerish, but since we've already seen this exact same thing happen previously in this season, I don't think it really qualifies here. CGI deepfake Mr. Miyagi. No, thank you. No, thank you. I didn't like it already when we got little bits of it before with Daniel having visions, and we get an even more extreme version of it in this last batch. That just the technology's not there. Like, I honestly think it'd be more satisfying to just cast a different actor and maybe have like the deep fake dialogue, like the computer generated audio of Pat Morita over this new actor. Obviously, none of it, there's no version of it that's ever going to really work because Pat Morita can't be there. So there's always going to be that uncanny valley. But we just don't have the technology, or this show doesn't have the budget to do the best version of that technology to really deliver on these very high concept scenes that they're trying to do with Daniel having these visions or these nightmares or these out of body experiences where Mr. Miyagi is there in the flesh. So anytime this show has done that, and I think it's only been this final season, I'm pretty positive, anytime that they have done that, I haven't liked it, and I think it was at its worst in this final batch here with what they do, because it was the biggest, most high concept version of that, and so it was on screen the longest, it was the focus the longest, and so the whole time you're looking at it, you're just like, oh God, you look awful. And I just don't think the show needed that. I don't think you needed to have that to convey what they're trying to convey about Daniel's inner conflict, or about him trying to figure something out about Mr. Miyagi, or come to terms with something. There's ways to do that without having to have CGI Pat Morita. So why they decided to do that in the first place, I'll never understand. But if you didn't like it before, you sure as shit ain't going to like it here, because it doesn't look any better. And one other thing that I'll say that I was going to mention in the mix, but this is the one aspect of the Terry Silver storyline that I just didn't think that they paid off. I think they also, they forgot about it. There's something that's introduced about his character that's intended to bring some kind of sympathy to him. It's intended to bring some kind of humanity to him, to make him more relatable as a person, I guess. But almost immediately after they reveal that, he just goes back to being regular old villainous Terry Silver. And at no point does it ever loop back to really bring that back into the fold. So that bit of information that we get that's supposed to be this really significant thing that we're told about Terry, it feels completely insignificant by the end of the show, because it never really has any relevance to what happens. So I don't really know what their intention was with that. You know, sometimes I think it's okay to just let villains be villains, and trying to bring in some kind of element like that can work really well, but they just chose to introduce it and not really go anywhere with it, which was odd. So now talking briefly about the entire final season as a whole. I think ultimately it's very satisfying because they're able to close out everything in a way that I really enjoyed, and I'm going to remember this final season for its best moments, but it's easily the weakest complete season of this show by a landslide because of pretty much what I was just talking about. A number of the things in this final season feels like its weakest batch of ideas to keep things going. A number of things that feel like we've already done this 2 or 3 times with the same set of characters. We're just talking about the same things. We're having the same conversations. We're having the same crises. We're having the same betrayals. Tori's changing sides again. And so while luckily they were able to land the plane and deliver 3 of the best episodes of this entire show, the whole season as a whole is very messy, very convoluted. And it's a shame because I think that there was a way that they could get these characters where they needed them to be to get to these final places that they wanted to have them, that I enjoyed every single one of them, without having to have a 15-episode season that was broken up into 3 spots. So while earlier on in this review, I was talking about my relief that this was a Cobra Kai finale and not a backdoor pilot for this upcoming movie, I think it's also very obvious as a fan that the only reason we got this final stretch of 15 episodes the way that we did is because of the movie. I think the only reason that we got the extended season that they could release periodically over a year and a half is because they wanted Cobra Kai on the brain for all of us up until a few months till the movie's going to come out. And that's always going to frustrate me. It's always going to frustrate me when you have a studio or some of the execs that compromise the quality of their product to promote other product. When season 4 ended, and you can go back and hear me say this, it felt like we were heading towards the end of the natural ending of the show. Organically, we're feeling like we are coming to a close. And then they wanted to do a full season with Terry Silver as the big bad, which was a good idea. And after having seen season 5 and the entirety of season 6, I think you very easily could have done maybe even a 15-episode final season of just combining 5 and 6, and you would have had a show that really was firing on all cylinders all the way from the start to the finish. But because they had a movie coming out, I think they deliberately made it a 6-season stretch and made the final season 15 episodes when they maybe didn't even have 10 episodes worth of really compelling storyline. So messy but satisfying is kind of the way that I would describe this final season. Luckily, the satisfying part of it is going to trump everything else. My positive experience with this is going to be what I remember it for, but there's a lot of issues with this final season that are still present in these final 5 episodes that I just wish we could have went down a different path with this show and delivered a phenomenal final season versus a final season of 15 episodes where the last 3 are phenomenal. So overall, guys, as a Cobra Kai fan from the beginning, I'm very happy with where the show decided to end. I'm very satisfied. I have a hard time believing that the majority of Cobra Kai fans won't be in agreement with me on that, but let me know all of your thoughts, positive and negative, down below, and keep your eyes peeled within the next week or so, and I'll do a full season ranking of now all 6 completed seasons of Cobra Kai. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my Cobra Kai coverage, and I'm also going to put my ranking of the Karate Kid movies up here for you to check out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.